All right, everyone, welcome to the Real Estate Game Changers Show. I'm your host, Mike McKay, based in Jacksonville, Florida. And each and every week, we do this show with people who are changing the game of real estate all over the country. And this is a live show, guys. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments for our guests to answer. This week on the show, we have JR Piper. JR, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. For the people who don't know you, could you share a little bit about how you got into your real estate journey and how that's led you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So I'm a Phoenix native, Phoenix, Arizona. I got into real estate in 2011. I was working a full-time job. I had a couple friends that were after the crash investing very heavily in real estate. They were pretty high level. They were buying 5 to 10 houses a day at the trustee sale. And uh,
Mm,
in my full-time job, which I was not really enjoying and not making much money at, I was looking to get into something else, and I had always been interested in real estate. And one day they asked me if I would be able to work for them, managing construction, dealing with, and basically work on a lot of the deals that they were doing. And like a good opportunity, right place, right time, just kind of fell in my lap. So I agreed to do it. And, I wasn't, I had zero experience. I was still working a full-time job. So in my free time, I was managing construction on, 30 houses a month and just sort of like hit the ground running and figuring it out as I went. And I wasn't making much money to do that. I used to get a little bit bitter about it actually, because for the amount of hours I was working and the amount of value I thought I was bringing, I felt like I should be getting paid more by these guys. And, in hindsight, what I tell people about that experience is that if I could go back in time and do it again, I would do it for free,
mm,
because the value that I got from having that experience and that proximity to these guys who are very sophisticated investors doing lots and lots of deals, it
mm,
was invaluable. It
mm,
accelerated my path, probably took me a year to learn what I would have figured out in 10 years on my own had I
mm.
not worked for them. So it was a very, very good experience for me. And then from there, it was like I was all into real estate. I loved it, fell in love with the game right away. I left my job. I got my real estate license. I started saving money, started buying my own rentals in 2013. I bought my first two
Mm.
rentals and continued adding to my portfolio from there. Started flipping shortly after that, started wholesaling, started doing all kinds of different things in the space, and it's just grown since then.
Yeah. What are some of those early lessons that you learned in that first year working with those guys that have carried with you to today?
So, this is 2011 was right after the market collapse of 2008. So there was a lot of fear and uncertainty about the real estate market. A lot of people were afraid to buy real estate or invest in real estate because
Mm,
so many people had just lost so much money that, everybody was in foreclosure back then. So one of the things that my that initial mentor kind of instilled in me was to be really, really conservative in the way that you approach deals,
mm,
and to be really careful with debt. Back in 2006, the banks were giving loans to people who couldn't afford them, and they were giving them way more money than they would ever be able to pay back, which we all know how that ended and how banking regulations have changed since then. But um, even today, my rental portfolio across the entire portfolio is probably leveraged 30 to 40%. Like,
mm,
I don't want to take on more debt, even though I could, and it'd be nice to have that cash. The more debt you take on, the more risk you have if there's a
mm,
market shift and the value comes down. Because
mhm,
long term, things tend to go up, but things fluctuate, as we know. And the
mhm,
last 10, 15 years, we've really seen the market only appreciate. We haven't seen it, I mean, significantly correct. I would say in 2022 to now, we've seen a shift, but there hasn't been any major crash or anything. And so
mhm,
these guys taught me to be really, really conservative with debt and with deals, and to make sure that when you do a deal, that you don't only want to focus on the upside potential of that deal, but you need to do everything possible to mitigate your downside risk and protect yourself.
mm,
And so I learned early on not to just flip houses and make a quick buck, not to just wholesale something and make a nice rip today, but can I retain the asset actually stabilize it and add it to my portfolio? And can I own that asset? Learn to seek ownership instead of income, right? And by owning the assets and controlling them, I was able to build a much larger net worth over time compared to what I would have made if I was only making the income and just trying to like hoard cash or whatever. And and back then, I mean, obviously the market was very different, but
Mm.
I was buying stuff that I knew would always cash flow regardless of what the market did,
Mm.
which was another important lesson I learned from those guys was anything that I buy, it needs to work with multiple strategies. I need to be able to sell it or flip it. I need to be able to wholesale it. I need to be able to hold it in case it doesn't sell or I have no other options and I have to hold on to it. So I kind of still to this day analyze every deal as a rental first. And if it
Mm.
works as a rental, I'm happy to buy it, especially if I have multiple other strategies that might also work as a fix and flip or a wholesale or a seller finance note. You know, I turn it into a note and sell it on a carryback. There might be multiple strategies, but as long as it works as a buy and hold, I know I'm safe on that deal. And if it cash flows and hits my metrics, I'm good to go on that one.
Yeah. Outside of like having multiple exit strategies for each deal, like what are some other ways that you go about making sure you mitigate that risk?
Um, being realistic about the numbers.
Mm.
I see a lot of people, a lot of investors, especially newer investors, mistake a lot of people make is they are too optimistic when they
Hmm.
underwrite their deals. They underestimate the repair or the renovation costs. They overestimate the ARV or the value. They don't factor in accurate closing costs. They think they're not going to pay concessions. And then when they go to sell it, the buyer's demanding 3% and they have no choice. And if that eats into their margin and leaves them, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so just being really honest with myself about what the value actually is, what the repair costs. I tend to underestimate the value or the ARV, overestimate the repair cost, and just assume I'm going to pay the maximum of everything on a Binzer and on concessions and closing costs. It's all going to cost the maximum it could cost. If you do that, then if your numbers are not accurate, you're typically coming in a better situation than what you projected. And
Yeah.
that's the side of it you want to be on. You don't want to be wrong and have it blow up the whole deal at the end because your numbers were too optimistic, too
Yeah.
hopeful.
Is there anything else that you're doing to mitigate your risks outside of those two things?
I'm buying in good areas. You know, I look a lot at location.
Mm.
I used to buy stuff in really rough neighborhoods, and what I've learned over the years is when you buy stuff in bad areas, it pencils really nicely on paper, but
Yeah.
then in reality, it ends up being more brain damage than it's worth. Number one. Number two, the numbers are never as sweet as they were on paper because what you can't price in is the tweakers stripping the copper four
Mm.
times while it's vacant, or your tenants getting burglarized every year and moving out. That you got a new tenant, you got a vacancy every year, and then someone stole the
Mm.
AC. You can't price that stuff in. You don't know what you can't. There's no way to estimate or project or anticipate those costs. So when you end up having all these headaches on a property and it's spent, you know, you can't even calculate your time involved in like dealing with all those issues or the stress of it, right? But you end up spending a lot more than you think, even when the
Mm.
deal's way cheaper if it's in a rougher area. So I tend to buy in nicer areas where I don't have to worry about, you know, the really like high risk neighborhood stuff that happens, a lot of
Mhm.
crime and vandalism and homelessness, stuff like that. Um, but also I try to buy in areas where I'm going to be purchasing and owning an asset in, you know, a desirable neighborhood, less crime,
Mm.
to buy a path growth. You know, I'll give you an example. I have a rental in Phoenix near what used to be Paradise Valley Mall in 85032 is the zip code. And it's a great house. It's been a great rental for me for years. And several years ago, PV Mall was sold to a big development company, and they were spending hundreds of millions of dollars to demolish the mall. And as soon as it sold and I heard about it, I went and I researched who is it sold to? What other projects have those guys done? How much are they investing in the infrastructure to, what are they going to build there? I was fascinated by it, one, but two, I saw an opportunity. Houses around there weren't that expensive yet. And so I knew,
Mm,
okay, if they're going to do something really cool here, it'd be great to own a bunch of houses right around there because a lot of people are going to want to live there. And so what they ended up announcing that they were building, it was 3 phases. It's still going on. I think it's in either phase 2 or 3 right now. And it's spectacular. They built like this very cool complex. I mean, there's 400 something luxury apartment units. There's restaurants, ground floor, retail, upstairs apartments. There's a central park area. There's a music venue. It's like a huge, mall-sized compound of just outdoor, uh, cool space and indoor, retail and businesses and living, residential housing, all kinds of cool stuff. It's beautiful. And so I went out and I started buying houses all around it. And
mm,
and those have been great investments for me because that thing's not even done, but the further along it gets, the more people are noticing that area and wanting to move there. So as the desirability of the area goes up, so do the prices. And so I think long term those investments will really pay off. So those are a couple things that I look at.
yeah. And then, how do you make, because like obviously Phoenix is not like a cheap market. I mean, it's not the most expensive, but
Mhm.
it's certainly not cheap. Like, how are you making rentals work from a cash flow perspective? I know in Jacksonville, I don't know much about Phoenix, but I know in Jacksonville, like it's very challenging for me to find a property now
Yeah.
that like even like makes sense as a rental, even if I'm buying it at 60% of value.
Yeah. So, and that's been a challenge for me too.
Mhm.
I've definitely bought a lot less rentals in the last few years compared to, 2013 to 20 like 18, 2019, even 2020. I was buying a bunch, and so that's really slowed down because the values have gone up so much, but the
Mhm.
rents have not gone up proportionate to the values.
Mhm.
So I kind of look at it a couple ways. Either I just have to be okay with lower returns on my investments, or I have to find better deals. And it's just hard to do either of those things. I have adjusted my expectations when it comes to returns, quite a bit over the years, because when I was buying in 2013 and 2015, I mean, I was buying 20 caps, like buying
Yeah.
houses in Maryvale for 50 grand that are renting for $1,000 a month. That doesn't exist anymore. Like
Yeah.
there's no $50,000 houses in Maricopa County anymore, and there's no deals out there where you can buy it for whatever the amount is and rent it for 2% of that amount. Like it's impossible to find in Phoenix. You'd be very, very lucky. It would be rare. So I have adjusted what I need for a return. I kind of keep it at a number where I feel okay about it, and I do very conservative underwriting. So the numbers probably ends up being better than what
Mm.
I project in reality once I get it all stabilized. But I basically, I look at a couple things. I look at not just the cash flow. Obviously,
Mhm.
that's a big one for me, but I look at the equity. Is this something that is going to add to my net worth day one? Is this something that is likely to appreciate in value over time? And of course, you can't know for sure, but Phoenix is a pretty big market. It's a hot market. Again, real estate fluctuates year to year, but long term, it pretty much always goes up. And so
Mhm.
10 years from now, 20 years from now, are these assets going to be worth more? Absolutely. With inflation and everything else, and more and more people coming to Phoenix, they're probably going to be worth more. So that's kind of like the hidden
Mm.
benefit of owning real estate, that you can't really know exactly what it's going to be. But I can tell you a large percentage of my net worth is in the real estate, just from the properties I own going up in value so much over the years, more than I ever expected. Uh, but I also look at the tax benefits. So I do cost segregations on a lot of assets that I own,
Mhm.
which for anyone not familiar with that, it basically, when you buy real estate, you are entitled to depreciate the asset, which gives you a deduction on your tax return. And what a cost segregation study does is it allows you to, instead of taking a little bit of money as a tax benefit each year over a really long period of time, it allows you to take a lot of money over a really short period of time.
Hmm.
And so like 1 to 5 years, I'm depreciating that whole asset. And so it reduces my tax bill significantly when I'm doing a lot of those.
Hmm.
There's multiple benefits of owning the real estate. So I kind of look at all that stuff, and depending on where I'm at tax wise, I might be a little bit more, flexible on buying an asset that doesn't necessarily hit the cash flow metrics that I want, but it's going to give me
Hmm.
the tax benefits that I need. And so
Hmm.
sometimes I can be okay with it that way, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But in general, I want to make a certain amount as a return. And if I love the asset, or I need to buy something for tax purposes, I might go a little bit below that. But I'm typically not wavering real far from my numbers. And so that's kind of like how I make it work in Phoenix. And then I'm very conservative, so I look for good deals and I try and build good relationships with
Hmm.
agents and sellers. And I'm 95%, I buy direct from the seller. I don't do a
Hmm.
ton with agents. I don't buy a lot from wholesalers. But I find pretty good deals out there. I figure out ways that I can add value to
Hmm.
them by purchasing the home. And if it can hit my numbers and I can make it work, then it's a win-win. And then one other thing I've done is I've if it doesn't work as a rental, or if it's not an asset that I want to hold, some of these I will turn into seller finance notes as
Hmm.
well, which is where I'm buying it, I'm paying cash, I'm then selling it and offering seller finance terms. And those actually cash flow more than if I hold it as a rental typically. But of course,
Hmm.
then you don't own the asset. So you're not getting the tax liability and you're not getting the appreciation, but you also
Hmm.
don't have to manage it. So there's pros and cons to both. And then I've also bought some commercial assets that have been pretty good on the cash flow side. There seems to be it's different, but there's houses, mobile homes, condos, townhomes, commercial assets. There's all of them have kind of their place, and so
Hmm.
maybe just broadening my horizons and not just sticking with one asset class, but like being flexible and learning different types of assets has presented me more opportunities to find deals that really make sense that I'm willing to buy and hold.
Yeah. What's your, and I know it's just a projection, but what's your thoughts on like the single family rental play, like long term? Like, I mean, I don't, obviously I'm not thinking we're going to get back to 20 caps, right? But do you feel
Right.
like there is going to be a point where like the returns kind of like they're not so compressed as they are now, or kind of what's your theory on that, at least in like the Phoenix market?
It's a really tough question because I don't know. I think at scale it works well even with lower margins on the returns, but it works because of long-term appreciation. Like
Hmm.
I know some guys that own. I've got one buddy, he owns over 300 single family homes.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's a lot of houses, and he'll buy stuff. He'll pay more than a lot of people. Like he'll buy stuff with pretty thin margins. Like I look at what he's paying, and I'm like, I couldn't make sense of that deal. I would only pay this much, you know.
Hmm.
But his thing is economies of scale. He's buying, I mean, hundreds of homes, and
Hmm.
so he's okay if they only cash flow a little because at scale it still ends up being a lot of money,
Hmm.
and he ends up with so much appreciation on all these homes. Now, hopefully, the market doesn't, crash and go down 30%. That would be not a good thing for him. But
Hmm.
he's been buying for so long. He has so many homes now. He has so much cash flow. His net worth is huge. He would be probably fine even if that happened. He would be able to weather the storm, and he wouldn't have any problems. But um, I don't know. I think long term, I think we're going to continue to see kind of what we've always seen, which is, again, the market will fluctuate year to year. Um, so you need to be strategic in what you're buying and what you're doing and how you're allocating capital. But long term, the values are going to go up,
Hmm.
rents are going to continue to go up. I mean, this is just something that happens in the economy with inflation and a growing city that's got a lot of desirable properties. You're going to see that growth, and you're going to see the costs associated all increase as well.
Yeah. What is Obviously, when you're keeping a lot of rentals, one of the challenges becomes, and I bring this up because it's certainly a challenge that I've faced, is okay, like I love the cash flow, but like I also need to like finance the business to keep the machine running, to keep the marketing running, to keep everything, to pay myself, right? I mean, $200 a month on a rental in Jacksonville that I buy for 100 grand is great, but you need a lot of those to put dinner on the table, right? So how do
Yeah.
you approach that? Like making sure you have enough money today while being able to like obviously keep that long-term cash flow coming in.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I kind of look at everything as, there's passive income and active income,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, or slow money and fast money is another way to say it, right? So like the rental income, the passive income it's slow. It
Mm-hmm.
takes time to accumulate that. Nobody is getting rich owning a dozen rental properties that
Mm-hmm.
net them a couple grand a month. It's just not that exciting. It's not that sexy. And you're not going to be like, drinking pina coladas on the beach carefree anytime soon, just
No.
doing that. But, you know, active income is what can create, what can make you rich. Passive income is ultimately, I think, what will make you wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the difference between being rich and being wealthy is rich means like I have a lot of money, you know? Wealthy is like I never need to worry about money again. And my
Mm-hmm.
kids don't need to worry about money. You know what I mean? It's the wealth to me is associated more with generational wealth as opposed to just like I have a lot of money and I can be flashy and live the lifestyle that I want, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I typically in my business when I started buying rentals, I mean, I started out, and this is I think unique in my journey because I was learning from guys that were buying and holding a ton of properties. I
Mm-hmm.
started out buying and holding. That was what I learned, and
Mm-hmm.
I saw the freedom that it could create. And so that was like from day one, that was my vision. That was what I wanted to create for my life. But a lot of people get into the business and they start by wholesaling or flipping. That's like a natural first step for a lot of investors, not buying and holding properties. And prices are very different today than they were was started buying. So obviously that made a big difference back then. If I was starting today, would I be looking at $300,000 and $400,000 houses, $200,000 houses, wanting to buy rentals? I don't know. Probably not. It wouldn't really make sense to me, you know. But back then, being able to buy something for 50, 60 grand and it rents for 800 or $1,000 a month, that made more sense mathematically. Now, I would say that when I really went full into real estate, full on, like became my full-time business and I started expanding and doing other things. It was clear, like, I am going to run out of money so fast if all I'm doing is buying rentals. You
Yeah.
have to have money, like you said, to support and operate the business and
Mm-hmm.
to invest in these assets. So, what I did was I kind of treated like flipping and wholesaling like a stepping stone. And it was my core business because it's what I spent most of my time on. And I got really good at just making a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And by generating large amounts of money, I not only was able to feed the business, pay myself a salary, but I never increased my lifestyle, which was a big deal for me. I still lived very, very modestly, even when I was making $1 million a year
Mm-hmm.
in active income. And then every dollar that I had, I was investing into real estate and buying good assets. I was just cherry picking deals that were coming in through my marketing channel that I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to own, and I would buy the asset, stabilize it, add it to my portfolio, and go find another deal. And I would do as many deals as I could to make as much money as I could. And when I started having a lot of cash, I would buy more assets, and some of them I would refinance or use debt on, but most of them I was just paying cash for because, again, I've been still instilled in me to be very conservative with debt. So I wanted to avoid using. I wanted to avoid over leveraging myself, which is a
Mm-hmm.
mistake a lot of people make, I think. And so, yeah.
And now, like, as you've built this rental portfolio, I mean, are there, kind of talking like things change, right? When you're first like buying them initially, you're putting kind of, if you are putting debt on it, you're putting debt on one house at a time. I mean, have you gone into more stuff where you're packaging a bunch of houses together and
Mhm.
putting debt on it, or what's your approach? from that perspective?
Absolutely. So I've done a couple of different package debt types of deals.
Hmm.
One of them is with my primary bank. I've packaged, 5 or 10 homes, and they'll give me a loan. It's a commercial loan, so it's not a traditional residential loan. It's more like a
Hmm.
commercial loan on a package of homes with them all pledged as collateral. And they gave me pretty good terms with a 10-year balloon. I've, plenty of time on that. The other thing I've done that has been really, really useful for me, and I've had
Hmm.
this for years, was I started because I had all these houses free and clear. I started going to banks and asking for a line of credit on the houses. So
Yeah.
one bank that I have a great relationship with today, they gave me a commercial revolving line of credit
Hmm.
on a package of homes. So it's typically a 1 to 3 year term. I can add or remove properties as needed. So if I sell one of the homes that's on the line of credit, it's not like I need to shut the whole thing down or replace it. I can just remove that one house from the line. If I buy a new house and I pay cash for it and I want it to the line, I can add it to the line, and I pay a fee or whatever and they put it on there. But that line of credit, I pay my rate is prime plus 0, which is a pretty good rate. So whatever prime is at is what I pay. When I first started using that line, prime was at like 4%.
Yeah.
So I had 4% money just at my fingertips. Now prime is a 7.5, I think. And so that's still a really good rate. And it's a 7-figure line. I've got a bunch of houses on that line, and I add and remove, as needed. But having a line of credit it's essentially the same as having cash. It's not like I need to submit any paperwork, ask anybody for permission to use the money. It's not a traditional loan where now I have the money and I have to, pay the bill every single month, pay principal and interest or any of that. It
Hmm.
just it's cash that is available to me as needed. So if I find a great deal and I don't have any of my own cash in that moment, I can draw that cash from my line. I can do it online. I don't need to even talk to the bank, and I just transfer the cash into my account. And then I pay interest only on the amount that I'm using while I'm using it. And
Hmm.
so I use that line for a variety of things. I've used it to buy a bunch of deals. I've used it to fund renovations on properties. If I was tight on cash, I used it to lend hard money, because I lend hard money at 12 to 15%. So
Hmm.
if I'm borrowing at 7.5 and lending at 12 or 14, it's a great spread, and I'm not even using my own cash. So it's been very, very useful, and I've made a lot of money using that line. To anybody that has assets free and clear, I would highly recommend building and establishing a relationship with a bank that's willing to do that, because that's been a game changer for me.
How did you go about finding the bank who was open to doing something like that initially?
So initially it was an introduction. Both banks have been an introduction from another person. One
Hmm.
was an introduction from a mortgage broker that I worked with at one point. I've done it with multiple banks, and the one that I'm with now was an introduction from my buddy that I mentioned that owns 300 single family homes. So banking is interesting. When you go to get a loan to buy a primary residence, it's pretty straightforward. The
Yeah.
bank's asking for a credit application, they're asking for your tax returns or your pay stubs, they're asking you to, give them some of your bank statements. Like it's a boilerplate process, and it doesn't really matter how they feel about you or any of that. When you're doing commercial banking or you're negotiating, $1 million line of credit with a bank, it's a totally different approach. These
Hmm.
package loan deals are more based on, I mean, it still is based on you as a borrower, but a lot of it's based on the relationship with the bank. So, one thing that I've employed when I've built relationships with banks over the years, and I've done this multiple times, is when I go to meet a banker who I know could potentially give me millions of dollars to help me grow my business and acquire new assets, I show up so freaking prepared. I don't show up there empty handed asking for money or telling him how great I am. They don't care. And they might like you, but I show up and I want to knock this guy off his feet. Like I'll take him to lunch. I will show up with a spreadsheet that is lists all of my rentals and all of my cash flow and the values. I'll show him a personal financial statement, a balance sheet, my net worth on it, all my assets and liabilities mapped out. I'll show him bank statements to show him the amount of liquidity I have in the bank. I'll show him other banking relationships I have. I'll show him a diagram with all my entities and what I use each LLC for and how they're structured. And the last time I did that, I remember the banker just saying, "Dude, I've been doing this 20 years. No one has ever shown up with this package like this." I made it so easy for him to be like, "Oh, you're legit. I like
Yeah.
you. You're going to be easy to work with. I could tell you're organized. You got a lot going on here, but it's very easy to understand because you got to understand that these guys are looking through your assets and they're trying to understand your income and your financial existence. They're trying to get a feel for who you are as a borrower, as a person, and also as a business person. And so when you
Mm,
show up like that, they're really impressed and they feel like, oh, this guy's going to be easy to work with and we can trust him with a bunch of money, you know?
yeah.
So it's commercial banking. It's a little bit different. It's not just based on the criteria of your income and your debt to income and all that. It's based on some guy deciding if he likes you or not,
Yeah.
you know? Some of it is anyway. So it's
Sure.
important to show up and put your best foot forward and know what to give them and how to present yourself.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that even today, like your business is about 95% direct to seller acquisitions. Like what does that
Mhm.
side of the business currently look like in terms of like staff and all that?
So I run a small operation. I haven't had any real big teams. I've had in-house as many as like 5 or 6 people on my team over the
Hmm.
years. Right now, it's me and one assistant. And the historically, the times that I've made the most money, been the most profitable, and been the most happy in the business are when it's just really small, me and 1 or 2 assistants. I don't like running a big team. I don't like managing a bunch of people. I understand there's a benefit to having, the right people in the right seats and getting to remove yourself from the business. But I enjoy the work. I enjoy running the business. I enjoy, being involved in the deals. So like I'm not trying to necessarily remove myself from the business.
Hmm.
There's certain things that I think are not the greatest use of my time, or I'm just not very good at them. So hiring to remove myself from those tasks is a great investment. But I enjoy being involved, and so I've got it's me and one assistant right now. We're doing a little bit of market. I've been kind of ramping things back up. I took a lot of time off when the market shifted in 2022.
Hmm.
Everybody I know in the business was working twice as hard and making half as much. And because I strategically invested early on and I have a lot of cash flow from my assets and my hard money loans, I really didn't need to work. So I was like, well, I'm going to take off for a while. I've been working really hard for a long time. I said, it feels like the right time to take a break. So I went and I traveled for a while. I had 2 kids, I bought a new house. We moved. I spent some time at home and just like relaxed. And then eventually I got bored and wanted to get back after it. So I'm back in the office and we're cranking things back up. I'm already buying deals, doing all kinds of stuff. But no, I mean the deals that come in, we're doing kind of like one of 4 or 5 things with them. I'm either buying it and holding it as a rental.
Hmm.
I'm buying it and selling it on carryback terms. I
Hmm.
am wholesaling it, wholetailing it. I'm fix and flipping it. It's going to fall in one of those buckets. And
Hmm.
so I kind of look at each deal accordingly, depending on the deal itself and the location and what opportunities make the most sense. I'll figure out which strategy I want to pursue and I usually will have 1 or 2 fallback options if the preferred, exit doesn't pan out.
Yeah. So I do find that that's super interesting that you took like that like basically what about 2 years off because
About 2 years, yeah.
I had a friend locally who said the same thing. He's sold a very large rental portfolio, and he's like, "I think now is the time to take some time off." I'm like, "Well, I'm not quite in that position." So I was a guy working
Yeah.
twice as hard for half the money. So
A lot of people were. Yeah, no, I'm grateful. It was a great position to be in, and I was glad I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. It's interesting though, people also I came back with kind of a different perspective too, because people talk a
Huh.
lot about wanting passive income and financial freedom, and what people don't talk about is what happens when you achieve it. There's also this like
Mm,
void where you get to a certain financial goal that you've been chasing for years, and you think like all your dreams are going to come true, and I'm just going to like hang out at home with my kids, or I'm going to go to the beach, or I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to relax, and just like, and man, it's like, for guys like me and you that enjoy, I mean, I enjoy the hustle. I enjoy the sense of achievement and the sense of purpose of like having something to hunt every day. Like, I enjoy the chase. And so all of a sudden, not having that, you do start to feel like you're lacking purpose. And so that was a bit of an adjustment for me. And then when I decided to come back to work, I've pretty much hit the financial goals I had set for myself. And so now I've set new goals, but
hmm
I'm also acutely aware that making more money isn't going to make me incrementally more happy than I
hmm
already am. So it's like, well, what am I doing it for? And there has to be a purpose behind it. And so I try to treat business like a game and act accordingly. We have fun, and I want to produce value for other people. I'm not just in it for the money. I want to do things that help others and uh, provide and give value. And that's, I think, a great takeaway is that anything that, like, for the listeners, like anything that you're doing, the more value you provide, the more you will ironically receive in return. When I started working for my buddies early on, and by the way, those guys, I had known them before that, right? I had been friends with those guys, but they had gotten into real estate. People used to say, "Oh, you're so lucky you had these connections," and I was like, "Dude, they're not doing me any favors. They're kind of dicks to me. Like, it's actually really hard. They were not like they didn't like let me in because I was their friend. They let me in
hmm
because they knew that I was smart enough and responsible enough to do what they needed to get done." And I treated it like, even though I was practically working for free, I treated it like, my life depended on getting things done for them and serving them and serving their business. Because I brought as much value as I did, they kept me around. They were happy to invest in me and share with me and explain what they were doing, and just having that proximity, seeing how they negotiated deals, how they analyzed things, how they made decisions. It was like, yeah, I hadn't been around people like that before. My parents didn't make decisions like that. They didn't come from money. They never invested in anything. You know what I mean? So it was all unfamiliar to me. But if you always seek to provide value before getting paid or getting something out of it for yourself, right? There's, I think, this weird like like it's like a reciprocity that happens between you and the seller or whoever, right? And even if you're not investing in a deal, and trying to make someone else's life easier, you show up at your job every day and finish all your tasks, and then go into your boss's office and say, "Hey, I'm done with everything that I needed to do today. What else can I take off your plate or do to make your life better and easier?" And next time somebody's up for a promotion, like, I'd be shocked if they don't come to you. You know what I'm saying? Like, value is uh, received by those that give it freely. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a really important rule to live by.
Yeah. When you took those like about 2 years off, like, and you kind of had that realization, right? Like, okay, like I've hit my
Mhm.
financial goals. It's maybe not exactly what I expected, where it's not like, okay, instantly I'm happy, everything's perfect, right? Like, how did you go about like figuring out like what was next for you? Like, what was that process?
Um, so honestly, I went to India for a month, and I spent 10 days at a silent retreat in an area called Dharamshala. It's in the northern region in the Himalayan mountains in northern India. It's
hmm
the same town that the Dalai Lama lives in. So I went to a place. It's called Tushita Meditation Center. I did a silent retreat where I didn't speak for 10 days, and I studied Buddhism while I was there. I studied
hmm
under a Buddhist monk, and I spent hours a day meditating. maybe a little unconventional approach to just like reflecting on my life and figuring out things, but it was fascinating. The first day I got there, my laptop and phone were locked in a safe, and you have no contact with the outside world. You have no TV, no screens, no stimulus, no nothing, right?
Hmm.
It's just you and your thoughts and nonverbal communication with other people that are there. And it was incredible how I went in there with some questions, some kind of big life questions that I wanted to reflect on and answer. Some of
Hmm.
them about business, some of them just personal things. And it was incredible how these things that I had sort of like grappled with for what seemed like years and I had no clarity on,
Huh.
after 2, 3 days of silence and this like heavy dopamine detox reset,
Hmm.
the answers just came to the surface like so clear.
Huh.
I had perfect clarity on them after a few days, and so that's something that I'll never forget. And anytime I now feel like I have some unanswered questions that are kind of tricky to figure out, I know that it's usually not a question of addition, asking more people for their input,
Mm.
you know, doing something to figure it out, telling everyone about it. What do you think? Well, this person said that, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to watch listen to a podcast or whatever. It's, dude, the answers, we all have the answers inside of us. So it was more a question of subtraction. What do I need to remove? All the distractions and the noise so
Mm.
that the answer that's in my heart can actually just come to the surface and I can get clarity on it. And so that's been a useful uh, practice for me.
What was I mean, if you're comfortable sharing it, what was one of the questions, whether it's personal or business, that you had been struggling with for years, and what was the answer that you came up with during that time?
Yeah. So one of them, I mean, just on that note was like, what else do I need in my life to feel more fulfilled, right? Because I think I had always kind of had this idea that you get to a certain amount of passive income, certain net worth, certain amount of wealth, you feel
Hmm.
really free financially, and like everything's going to be okay. Like, I'm like grinding all these years to like achieve this major financial goal, and then like you get there and you realize you really don't feel any different than you did, other than that you have no financial stress now, which is great. It's a very blessed position to be in, don't get me wrong, but like the human condition isn't just based on like we don't generate happiness just by having like more money or more material things,
Hmm.
in fact, I would even argue, and I'm certainly not complaining about my financial situation, but I would even argue that in some weird sense, more financial stuff, more money, more things can actually create more stress in your life because it's more to manage.
Hmm.
And from since we're on the topic, from a Buddhist perspective, the more attachment we have to things, the more suffering we create in our lives, because there's
Hmm.
fear of losing these things, or something gets damaged or we got to replace it, maintain it. It's just like it adds more noise to our life, more things to do. But this question was one of the questions was, how do I feel more fulfilled, where I just feel like
Hmm.
truly content. Not that life's going to be perfect or I'm never going to have bad feelings, right? But like, how do I just feel more fulfilled in my life? And like, what do I need to do in order to feel more fulfilled? That was the question. And after reflecting on it for a few days, I realized that I had been asking the wrong question. I had been thinking about what I need to add. And I realized that wasn't the answer. The answer was subtract. The answer was remove any negativity, remove any noise that doesn't serve you, right? That was part of the reason I decided to take all that time off. It was like
Hmm.
you need to take some time and just enjoy the life that you've built. You're so busy always looking for the next thing, the next deal, the next investment, the next level to get to, that you don't slow down enough to just enjoy the life. And so, and I've done a lot of traveling over the years. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I would say I've done my fair amount of enjoying my situation. I will travel for a month or two at a time and explore different countries, but that was part of the big reason that I slowed down and I just tried to simplify my life and like really derive my happiness and joy from connecting with my kids and my wife and other people and friends and relationships as opposed to any material things or achievement,
Mm.
you know? And so that's been beautiful. And yeah.
I think that's awesome. When you did decide to jump back into your business, after taking that time off and after learning that kind of lesson, like, did you structure your business differently than you had previously? Or like, I guess what changes did you make on the business side that in order to like be able to keep that fulfillment that you were looking for?
So I wouldn't say I structured the business differently, but I definitely approach it differently. So,
Huh.
prior I would come to work and it was like grind, grind, grind at all costs. It was the most important thing. Like every deal mattered more than anything. Like I would leave in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner if like a seller was ready to sign a contract. You know what I mean? Like I was just like, every deal matters. I got to do whatever it takes. I'd work 20 hours a day if I had to. I wouldn't sleep. Like it was the peak of everything. And so now I'm more like family first, right? Like my wife and kids are the most important thing. And the business
Mm.
is still really important, but I'm not going to like sacrifice certain things or meaningful moments that are important to me. I don't care how much money I'm going to make, right? And
Mm.
so that's one mindset shift is like I've made a lot of money. I've been really blessed and fortunate, and I've had a lot of success. And so I no longer feel like I need the money, which
Hmm.
ironically also somehow makes me more appealing to sellers because I think they can sense that
Yeah.
desperation when you're like, I'll do whatever it takes. Like, just give me the deal, But
Yeah.
when you like, I'll walk into a seller's house and straight up tell, I mean, I just bought a house a few months ago and I ended up keeping it as a rental. But I told the seller, I walked in day one, I said, this deal is not going to make or break me. I honestly don't care if I buy your house. What I want is to be a resource first for you, right? I'm going to walk you through how you can make the best decision possible for you and your family. And if I end up being the right buyer for you, I'm happy to buy the deal. Right? If the numbers make sense for me and you feel good about the offer I make and with me as someone you want to work with, I would love to buy it. But like, if you don't feel like I'm the best option for you, there's no pressure and there will be no hard feelings if you sell it to someone else. I want you to do what's best for you. I mean that. And she was
Mhm.
blown away. She was like, dude, you're so different than every other investor I've talked to.
Yeah.
And it was like, we ended up, it was a multiple week negotiation. I was essentially like, uh, I was almost like a consultant for her. Like I was like telling her how to make decisions, what questions to ask when she's screening investors, like what she needs to be doing in the process. And after weeks of getting offers, she and I were in regular contact. And all of a sudden she calls me. She says, I have, these are the offers I have. I was not the highest offer, by the way, but she was like, I couldn't even think of selling it to someone else. Like, you're the
Huh.
only guy I want to work with out of everyone I've talked to. And it ended up being a great deal. And I kept it. I remodeled it. It's beautiful and got great tenants in there. But so my approach is a little more laid back and I would say I have a heavier focus on producing value for that seller and for the
Hmm.
people that work for me or the people that I do business with than I ever have in the past. In the past, I was a little more selfish and greedy. I was so hyper fixated on how do I monetize this and how do I maximize my profit on every single inch of I want to squeeze every penny out of every deal from
Hmm.
every different angle. And now I'm like, I don't mind leaving a few bucks on the table if it helps someone else. It's okay,
Hmm.
So that's definitely been a difference for me. And then I think just less serious. I'm trying to be more like, the real estate and business, it's a game. And it's so easy to start taking it so serious. It can be really stressful. It can feel like a war sometimes, so that it can be overwhelming at times, but I try and treat it like a game and have fun with it and enjoy the process. I don't want to be stressed all the time making a bunch of money. I want to be enjoying what we're doing, and I want there to be a fun and creative aspect to it, so that it flows and it's productive and everyone is enjoying it.
Yeah, I like that. And then, I mean, you've got different aspects of your business, right? Obviously, you have, you do some lending, you've got the rentals, the
Mhm.
fix and flips, the wholesales, a couple other things you mentioned. With running a small team, how do you manage your focus every day to know, like, okay, I need to focus on this today, but then, like, you might get a phone call from a seller call, or you might get something else that comes in that's urgent, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it's not, but
Well, I was diagnosed with ADHD, so I would say I have pretty extreme ADHD, which actually helps with
yeah,
jumping from thing to thing and
yeah.
being like manic all day. So honestly, it's gotten harder over the years as I've added more things to my plate in
Hmm.
business and in personal life. But it is a lot to manage. I would say we've created pretty good systems for most of it. And
Hmm.
so like I have a giant list of checklists. I've got a checklist for every type of transaction, whether it's a wholesale deal, a fix and flip, a renovation, a rental, like every part of every process in every transaction, I've got a checklist for that we've just built over the years that allows us to kind of have like a fail safe, so that things don't uh,
Hmm.
fall through the cracks. People remember what they're supposed to be doing and the order they're
Hmm.
supposed to be doing them in. You know what I'm saying? They don't have to think or expend a lot of mental bandwidth trying to remember what they're supposed to do next, or how to deal with something. And so that's really useful. I'm a big checklist guy. I love checklists. And then the other thing I think is just like, you know understanding where to prioritize my time, and
Hmm.
and knowing what I need to delegate out, you know? And so, one thing that I think, again, I think I'm probably somewhat unique in this way because I've been in a lot of masterminds with other guys that have really big businesses. They got 10, 20 employees, 50 employees. Like I know some guys that run really big operations, and they bring in a ton of revenue. But one thing that I noticed, because for years I'm in these masterminds and I'm seeing guys that have these big teams and several $1 million a year in revenue.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, it's me and one assistant. That's it. And I am netting as much or more than these guys that have these big giant businesses. And
Huh.
it was like it's weird because the grass always seems greener on the other side, right? I for years would look at these other guys and I was like, I want to build a big team. I want to have 5-10 million a year in revenue. But did I really want that, or did I just want the ego boost of being able to say we did 5 million last year? Like it wasn't actually appealing to me because every time I tried to hire a bunch of people and grow my business to that point, I was miserable. I was stressed. I'm
Hmm.
not a great manager, and I enjoy doing the work. So I was actually giving up the job that I liked doing to do a job that I hated. And
Hmm.
it just didn't sit well with me. And then I'm an avid traveler. I've been to 38 countries. I go to a few countries a year. Like it's mandatory for me. And so just to explore and experience the culture and like do something fun. And so if I would leave the country, like either people would get resentful or it was kind of weird that I was leaving, or the train would totally run off the tracks. Like it just didn't work well for my lifestyle. And I don't remember when, but at one point I finally just said, like, why am I trying to build this thing that clearly I really don't want?
Hmm.
And that's another, to go back to your question, that's another shift I think is coming back. I was very clear on that. I was like, oh, I don't want that at all. I want to keep my operations small and intimate. I want to remain flexible. I want my employee or employees to have that same flexibility and comfort, and I want to be able to kind of just do what I want to do, but I want to be high profit margin, but I don't necessarily need to do millions of dollars in revenue, because if I can have 80% margin profit margins, dude, if I'm bringing in a million or 2 million a year, like I'm doing pretty good
Yeah.
compared to someone running a $5 million a year business in revenue, but they're bringing in 20%, 30%. It's like they're not making much more than me, if at all. So it ends up being kind of like, which one, they're both are going to be hard.
Hmm.
Which one is going to suit your lifestyle better? And so that for me, that's just a better, it fits my lifestyle, my personality better.
Yeah. I think that's like a Yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing that you bring it up, that it's because like you were giving up the job that you liked to do something that you didn't like, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I at one point was building out like our operation and was building out a big like in-person operation. Then what I realized is like what I really like is to be able to like run a virtual operation and I do like building a team. I enjoy that part, but I like everyone to be able where they want. I mean, like I'm in Colombia right now. Like I want to be able to do
Nice.
that. Right. So like, why did I build this big in-office team? That's because I like saw other people doing it and I thought that was how you had to do it to scale, frankly. And I was wrong.
Yeah.
Totally wrong.
Mhm. Yep.
So I kind of had like the same inflection point as you, except from a little bit of a different perspective. But I can 100%
Yeah.
see where you're coming from.
Yeah. For sure. Love it.
Um,
I also think that there's, my bigger vision, my longer term goal was always to it wasn't to build a really big business. It was to generate a lot of revenue so I could invest in assets. And
mhm,
the assets itself had become a business. And so at this point, like my portfolio is large enough and generates enough passive income that there's a decent amount to manage there. It's not totally passive. Rentals never are, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
it generates a lot of cash flow, so that could now continue to grow. So that's another shift I've had coming back to work is that I'm
mm,
I'm also focused more on just acquiring new assets as opposed to the transactional business. I'm probably more focused on the buy and hold aspect or creating notes or lending. I love
mhm,
those three arms of the business, if you will,
mhm,
more than I do the transactional, wholesaling, fix and flip, all that stuff. I mean, you pay so much in taxes on a flip or a wholesale deal anyway. These other ones have tax benefits that, lending, I still pay the same tax rate as ordinary income, but it's that one actually is nearly 100% passive and it
mm,
is very low risk and very high margin. So I just love the lending business. I would encourage anyone with any extra capital whatsoever to get involved in it if they can. But yeah, I mean, I probably focus a little bit more on that part of the business, buying new assets as opposed to just flipping and wholesaling. You know,
yeah. You mentioned, you hit your goals, you set some new ones. I mean, I'm guessing they're kind of around these three pieces you just spoke about. But what are your new goals since you came back?
yeah. So new goal from an asset perspective would be 100 million in assets,
Hmm.
and and then I would say net 100,000 a month from
Hmm.
my rental portfolio.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and I'm not too far off from that right now, but um, it's kind of like a stepping stone too. I'm sure I'll set new goals after I achieve that. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Take a little more time off. Set some new ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're getting close to the end here, and there's always two questions I like to ask at the end of the show. First is, what is the craziest or most uncomfortable situation that you've ever experienced in a real estate deal?
Craziest or most uncomfortable. So I've got a lot of stories, having done a lot of deals over the years. I would say there's there's a couple that come to mind. One was on a rental property that I owned. I
Hmm.
had a property listed for rent. It was a deal that I still own in Phoenix. I had listed it for rent for I think $1,500. It was about market rent at the time, and my tenants were scheduled to move in on Monday. And on Friday afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and I answered it. And she said, "Hey, this is so and so. Where can I meet you to get the keys for 50th Drive?" And I said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I'm your new tenant." And I said, "No, my new tenant's name is Kathy, and she moves in on Monday." And the lady said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I'm the new tenant, and we moved in yesterday, and I need the keys." And I was so confused, but I was like, "Well, you moved into the house already?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "You're living there?" She said, "Yeah." I was so confused. I said, "Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." I drove across town. I called the police. I show up at the house. These people had apparently what had happened was, there's a lot of Craigslist scams out there. Somebody had taken my listing. for
Mhm.
$1,500 and the pictures of the house and everything. And they had listed it on Craigslist for like $800 a month.
Yeah.
So this lady had gotten swindled by a Craigslist scammer. She wired him 800 for the deposit, 800 for the first month's rent. And they actually sent, the scammer sent a locksmith to my house to drill out the lock and rekey it. And they let her in, I guess, or they left the door on. I'm not sure exactly, but they gave her access to the house, and she and her husband moved in. And I walked in, they were like, the mattress was on the floor, and there was like, they've been there a day, and there was like cigarette butts put out in the kitchen sink already. And I was, so that really pissed me off. I was like, dude, like, you moved in here a day ago and you're putting out cigarette butts in the kitchen sink. It's very weird. But I explained to her that she had likely been scammed, and that, I'm sorry that that happened to you, but that's not my problem. I have a tenant moving in here on Monday, and now I got to have the house cleaned again. You need to get out like now. You're trespassing. And she was very upset. And she said, well, how do I get my money back? I said, I have no idea. It's not, I wish I could help you with that, but I have no clue. Like, that's got nothing to do with me. And anyway, so that was pretty wild and unexpected. And
Yeah.
then another one. I was just actually I was telling my assistant this story this morning, so I think it's just fresh on my mind. But a few years ago, I got a PBC lead from a guy who was going to prison. He said he's facing 15 years, and he needed money for an attorney, and so he wanted to sell his house immediately. He wanted like fire sale it, and I said, he said he would need to close in 3 days. I said, okay, I can do that. And he said, only issue, my brother and it is living in the house. So you're going to have to evict him. He said, there's not time to get him out. And I don't want you to tell him that I'm selling the house. You just need to evict him once you close. And I said, okay, I can do that. I
Yeah.
drove by the house, did my research for a day or two. Just, it's a risky deal. You can't knock on the door. You can't see the inside. I have no idea what's going on inside of that house. But I ran the numbers. I thought that house is probably worth, if I'm being conservative, it's probably worth 400,000 worst case, 500,000 absolute best case if it's like
Mhm.
decent. And so I offered him 200 grand. I said it's a sight unseen deal. It's a sharky offer, but I have no idea what I'm going to be dealing with. Plus, I got the stress, expense, and headache of and risk of having to evict an occupant who might be hostile. I have no idea. The guy
Mhm.
might burn the house down. Like, I have no clue. So he said, that's fine. He said, it's a little less than I wanted, but I'll take it. So he agreed to my offer. I closed in 3 days in cash. And I drove to the house with a copy of the deed in hand. And I knocked on the door to tell these residents that I had just bought their house, and they either needed to start paying rent if they want to stay, or they can move out. And the wife answered the door, and she was so confused when I told her that I had bought the house from the brother of the husband. And she started telling me, we own the house. It's in his name, but we've paid for everything. We put the husband showed up, expecting me they had put the down payment down. They had paid the mortgage payment. He had spent $40,000 remodeling the kitchen. He had done an addition with 2 bedrooms on the back, so it had 6 bedrooms now. It was a great house. He let me walk through it. It was beautiful. I saw the house. I felt so bad. I thought this house is probably worth $600,000. It was completely redone, and it was gorgeous. And their entire family was living there. They had like 4 or 5 kids and 2 adults. So I had to explain to these people that even though maybe your brother screwed you over, I still bought the house, and it's done. And they were in denial. They couldn't understand how this dude sold the house. They said, we've made all the payments. I said, yeah, but it was in his name. He had ownership, and he sold it to me. And now I have ownership. So I was really conflicted about that one, because it's like it was a really good deal. Like, if I had sold that, I would have sold that house for 600 grand on the market. Or what I would have done, I would have kept that was a I keep the very best deals for myself, even if I can make a lot. I typically they pencil as a rental, and they do really well long term. So I would
Yeah.
have kept that one in my portfolio. I really wanted to keep that house, but I did not feel okay kicking this man and his family out of their home that clearly was their home and that they had paid for. But I also took a big risk and invested in the deal, so I wasn't going to just give them the house back, for what I had in it. So it was I thought about that for a day or two, and then I came back to him. I said, okay, I think there's a way that we can both get what we need here. I said, I'm an investor. I buy and sell properties. I'm not an asshole, so I'm not going to kick you out of your house. and I'm not going to charge you full retail for the house. I will sell you the house. I will leave equity in the deal for you. I think I sold it to him for 375. So I made a lot of money on that deal, but I left him quite a bit of equity. I basically split the equity with him, and he
Yeah.
was he didn't like that, but he didn't really have a choice. And he at the end he did say, "I'm grateful that you gave us the opportunity to buy the house, because um, you know, another guy might have just said like it's full retail or get out, or just
Yeah.
kicked him out and kept it, which is, I wanted to keep the house, but I couldn't do that to those people. I got to be able to sleep at night. So that
Yeah.
was pretty wild. That was a unique situation, and I feel like I handled it well.
Yeah. That is a crazy unique one. I
Yeah,
haven't heard that one
yeah,
before. Huh.
yeah. It was wild.
Well, the final question I always ask for the newer people listening to the show is, if you could go back in time, give yourself one piece of advice when you were looking for that first deal, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself that uh, so by nature, I am a bit of a perfectionist.
Hmm.
And I would tell myself, quit worrying about trying to figure everything out and make it perfect or waiting for the right time. You just
Hmm.
need to move. You just
Hmm.
need to take steps. You don't even have to know exactly where you're going or exactly how to get there if you have somewhere in mind. You just need to start moving forward and taking action, because you listen to like Mark Zuckerberg talk about when they created Facebook. They had no vision for it to become Meta and for them to own Instagram and be one of the leader of social media in the world. I mean, he had no clue it was going to turn into that. So
Hmm.
sometimes as he said, the vision doesn't come out fully formed, and you have to just take action and figure it out as you go. The people I think who are the most successful in life, they're not always the smartest or the ones with the most resources or the ones with impeccable timing. They're just the ones that like are willing to take risks.
Hmm.
And the cost might be failure, but you never really fail at anything because you learn from every failure. So you either succeed or you learn. Either way, you're winning. And as long as you're taking action and moving forward, things will happen, and you'll make progress. So that's what I would tell myself is, dude, just start moving. Like, I was lucky I had an opportunity that fell in my lap, but I can't tell you if I didn't have that opportunity, if I would have made the jump from my career to real estate, if I just had to do it on my own. I certainly don't think I would be where I'm at now. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah. I think that's an amazing piece of advice. JR, if people want to reach out to you after the show, if they have questions, or maybe they want to reach out to you about some deals, how can they go about getting in touch with you?
Absolutely. My Instagram's probably the best way to reach me. My Instagram handle is just my name, at Jared Ryan Piper. So the at symbol and then JaredRyanPiper. Hit me up anytime.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show, man. This is great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.